Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being at the Public Safety Committee meeting this afternoon. We actually have 4 items on our agenda. The first is the Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service, followed by the White Flint Fire Station, followed by the FY23 supplemental appropriation for MCFRS of $10,449,635. And then after that, we're going to be discussing Bill 1423, which is the Late Night Business Safety Plan. The first 3 items Ms. Farag has done, and once again we want to very publicly thank her for doing an extremely good job of giving us the information that we so needed. And with that, if the people who were associated with the first item would like to come forward, and we'll ask them to identify themselves, and then we're going to ask Ms. Farag to lead us through. Unless people on the committee have something to say. Okay, we're good. Chief, would you like to tell everybody who you are, please?
Scott Goldstein, Fire Chief from Montgomery County Fire Rescue.
Dominic Del Pozo, Fiscal Management Division Chief, Fire and Rescue.
Charles Bailey, Operations Chief for the Fire Department.
Thomas Tippett, OMB.
Thank you all and welcome. And with that, Ms. Farag, if you could please lead us through.
Good afternoon, everyone. For the fire budget this year in FY24, its proposed budget's about $267 million. That's about a 5.6% increase for the year. It does contain 11 new positions to enhance service delivery to the community. These are being funded through ESPP funds, which I will get to in a couple of minutes. The highlights for today include the fact that there is still a structural overtime deficit. It's about $8.3 million over budget for FY23. The FY24 budgeted overtime also does not accurately reflect predictable expenditures. That's new for this council, but the prior Public Safety Committee and Council has
it's nothing new.
Yes, reviewed it several times. So the recommended FY24 operating budget also shifts facilities maintenance function for volunteer stations from MCFRS to the Department of General Services, and that's for a net increase of about $400,000. And net, when I mean net, I mean for the entirety of county government, not just DGS and not just fire and rescue. I'm just going to go through the structural deficiencies to start with. The department has maintained a structural overtime deficit since FY17, and out over the 7 years, that's about $7 million over budget each year. Recently, these overages have been addressed through a supplemental appropriation. You have another supplemental appropriation today for $8.3 million, item number 3 on the agenda. And this structural overtime deficit stems from 2 primary factors. The department is significantly understaffed and can't meet minimum staffing requirements for the services it's currently providing to the community. And while projected overtime consistently costs the county an average of about $24 million a year, on average over the past 7 years, the executive's been providing about $17 million a year. So the costs are known and they're not budgeted. As far as minimum staffing, required staffing, fire department needs a minimum number of human beings on pieces of apparatus in order to respond to calls for a variety of reasons. And they currently have 314 seats that they have to staff every day. I've got a chart on page 4 that deals with historic overtime cost overruns, just so you could get an idea of what the scope of that's been over several years. And I do want to note that it was only about $1 million or so back in FY14, FY15, and FY16. Part of the reason it started skyrocketing is for a savings plan. They completely omitted a recruit class, and it's been difficult to address attrition since that point. There's an illustration of the different types of reasons for overtime on page 6 by function. In FY18, I believe County Stat did conduct a minimum staffing analysis of the fire department, and they determined that the department needs about 180 additional firefighters in order to meet its minimum staffing requirements, but that's without any overtime. And you can't do public safety without some overtime. Some overtime use is absolutely efficient and necessary, but the gap of 180 firefighters is too big. And over the years, the executives added between 30 and 35 firefighters, but that has not really significantly put a dent in the overtime use. And so because of this, and because budget is not, the overtime's not appropriately budgeted, one of my global types of recommendations is to ask the Fire and Rescue Department and OMB to return after budget before the Public Safety Committee with a plan that more appropriately staffs and funds actual fire and rescue operations. Because if the executive continues to budget overtime like this at far lower than the experience has shown, it's going to continue to request supplemental appropriations, and that's going to pull from the reserve every year. So the next thing I wanted to discuss was the fairly new revenue stream, which just started getting this last year, and this is for Maryland Emergency Service Transporter Supplemental Payment Program, or ESPP. The state submitted a Medicaid plan amendment to the federal government, and these are all federal fund reimbursements, and it makes the department whole on its transport fees, which are listed on page 7. They're expected to get $13 million in FY24, and I apologize for typos, which I thought I'd caught, but I have not caught them all. And the executive has designated about 15% of this new funding stream to be distributed to the LFRDs, and that's in a manner similar to ambulance fees, which I'll also discuss in a minute. While the ambulance fee dispersal is required under law, the ESPP Fund 1 is not. This is one of the recommendations I have for your consideration as far as how to better right-size the actual budget and to help try to reduce some of the cost overruns. If you choose, you could take this 15% that goes to LFRDs, which is about $2.1 million, and place that toward the structural overtime deficit. There are two options for addressing that. You could change the overtime budget from $19.6 million to $21.7 million. That will help reduce next year's deficit. It doesn't change the bottom line this year in budgeted costs, but it'll help mitigate future supplemental appropriation requests by a similar amount. And the second option is if you want to use those $2.1 million to more appropriately right-size staffing within the department, you could add 25 additional firefighters to further close that gap, that 180 gap. That was originally identified several years ago. Each firefighter costs about $80,000. That option, of course, adds merit positions, which I completely understand. Many council members may not want to do that, but I just did want to point out that it will actually reduce expenditures, overtime expenditures, and that won't start until about FY25 once they actually get people trained and out of the academy. However, it is basically a more transparent way and a more appropriate way to budget the actual fire services that are being delivered to the community. So I'll move into FY24 expenditures. As I stated before, they're adding about 11 positions, and those are listed on page 8. The first 3 positions are a uniform community action coordinator and 2 civilian community risk reduction specialists. They'll provide public education and prevention work that are targeted to help more vulnerable communities in an effort to reduce health outcome disparities. The position will work with community leaders and other community members to provide education on various preventive topics. And the 2 civilian community risk reduction specialists will also assist with educational outreach. And they can participate in educational classes and demonstrations in both schools and to seniors. The uniformed peer support and CISM manager and civilian psychologist for a total of $245,000 and 2 FTEs. The psychologist position will expand mental health services for staff, and the uniformed position will coordinate the training and response for the critical incident stress management and peer support team. Right now, the department has 1 licensed psychologist and 1 licensed clinical social worker. An investigator 3 position has also been recommended. This will actually help expedite internal investigations or in internal affairs. There's currently 1 investigator now, and when staff are under investigation, they're placed on administrative leave, and their position must be backfilled with overtime. So closing these investigations more quickly will help return some of those firefighters to the field and help mitigate some overtime costs. The cadet program in partnership with MCPS is $116,000. That was a mid-year supplemental appropriation that partially funds the cadet program. Those costs are split between the fire department and the school system. The program itself is held at the training academy, and students from all high school clusters are eligible to apply. If someone applies in grade 11, they can apply for a fire and rescue course, and if they apply in grade 12, they can apply for the EMT course. And theoretically, when they graduate, having successfully passed this, then they can apply directly to the fire department. IT specialist position will help manage land mobile radio systems in the department. This position's been vacant for several years, and it was eventually abolished to provide budget capacity for other priorities. In the meantime, uniformed firefighters have been performing this function on overtime. A fleet road technician will provide mobile vehicle maintenance when appropriate, instead of requiring apparatus to go to the central maintenance facility for service and repairs. In certain situations, a mobile technician can go right to the piece of apparatus to perform the services, and that will help reduce vehicle downtime. Contract specialist in fiscal management will help with contract development and procurement. They currently have one position managing this work, and the workload's too complex for just one position. Civilian Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. As part of reimagining public safety back in 2020, the executive wanted to have audits performed on both police and fire, and the one for fire was actually divided into two. One is a racial equity audit, and one was for operations. I have the racial equity audit. I'm not sure it's online, so it's not easy to send you a link to it, but I've got the PDF version of that. I sent it to the old council, and I'll send it to the new one. But one of the recommendations was to include a DEI officer within the department. It just wanted to note briefly, the chief had that function prior to COVID, but it was being performed again, duty off the floor with backfilled overtime, which is extremely expensive, but it has been an initiative that's been important to the department for several years. An administrative specialist position for about $90,000. That'll help with recruitment, hiring, and managing the promotional processes. It's important for those processes to be efficient and timely. There is competition in the region for firefighters, and so if applicants have applied to more than one fire department, they may accept first offers from elsewhere. The FROMS contract adjustment, this is Fire and Rescue Occupational Medical Services, and this reflects an increase in the department's portion of the new contract costs. The county recently rebid the contract and has a new vendor, and Fire and Rescue pays about 48% of those total costs. The insurance premium increase represents premium costs, actual premium costs, but it also aligns them with the budget cycle. They had been running a deficit on insurance premiums, and it was budgeted 1 year in arrears, and this increased costs will right-size that and also reflects the increased premium. For Sandy Spring Fire Station, $100,000. This was this provides additional funding for staffing at Station 40 in Alney, and it helps reduce failures to respond. The funding supports some staffing at the station. Medical Director contract CPI adjustment is fairly self-explanatory. The EMS resource to reduce overtime is a savings of $650,000. This was put in as a flexible resource that was the department was supposed to kind of look at data and examine what was the best way to use this resource, and it's funded through ESPP funds. It has not been implemented yet, so this was savings that could possibly be provided with minimal impact since it hasn't actually been deployed. It will permit, if you approve this change, it's not reducing actual expenditures, it's shifting them to the overtime. It permits 5 FTEs to be assigned elsewhere to reduce overtime. And then the shifting of the LFRD facilities maintenance to DGS to enhance support, and Mr. Dice is here from DGS if he wants to comment on this piece. In the overall budget, it is shifting facilities maintenance from the Fire and Rescue Department to DGS, and it shifts associated funding but not staff. So in the FY24 recommended Department of General Services budget, you'll see $2 million has been added to assume these functions, but in addition to that, it's adding $502,000 for 5 new positions who will provide LFRD facilities maintenance services. Although they've reflected a $2 million reduction in the recommended fire department budget, this operational shift is actually represents a $421,000 net increase to county expenditures. And again, that's to full county expenditures, taking into consideration the 2 different types of changes happening both in DGS and Fire and Rescue. So the facility section in FRS currently performs this work, and they're responsible for coordinating and planning repairs and renovations and ensuring that they're completed in a timely manner and that all work complies with applicable codes. They have 47 work sites. 22 of those are managed already by DGS for core building maintenance, and 25 are owned by the LFRDs, the local fire and rescue departments. Facilities maintenance within the fire department currently is responsible for all maintenance at those sites, and it's also responsible for all programmatic requirements at all 47 sites. As I was investigating this a little bit more, I wanted to better understand what the costs would be if it were maintained, if this function were maintained within the fire department. And there's a chart on page 12 that shows what the difference would be if you maintain the function within the department. And this is in comparison, in relation to the recommended budget, not actual current practice. So the first column shows if you decided to maintain these functions within the fire department, it would be a $2.5 million reduction in DGS. And then the fire department has calculated that they would probably need to add a uniform captain position, 2 facilities maintenance, and an additional 1 facilities maintenance coordinator. And the shifts that take place there in personnel would be about $173,000 to add a captain position. And if you return the overtime paid captain who's already there working on straight overtime, you would save about $81,000. The 1 facilities maintenance coordinator costs about $76,000. And the net change is reflected in the chart. If it were maintained within the fire department, you would actually reduce net county expenditures by about $335,000. In terms of vacancies, the department has about 363 FTEs budgeted, 11 of which are actually included in this year's recommended budget as new positions. As of March, they had a total of 43 vacancies, and that represents about $5 million in personnel costs. Their lapse for FY24 is actually $4.5 million. I did want to note that in FY13, they abolished 14 long-term vacant positions that are listed on page 13, so they don't have as much room to play, as much flexibility as far as looking for some potential reductions there. For the Volunteer Fire Rescue Association agreement, they are currently negotiating this agreement and it has not yet been submitted to the county, so the council does not have it. In the past, the council reviews any potential increased funding in that agreement, and typically those proposed agreements provide increases in association funds, training, nominal fee, volunteer basic orientation costs, and LoSAP benefits. Just to give some idea of how much it costs, that agreement generally is about $2.6 million. In terms of the EMST funds, this Bill 713 requires the county, it first established an ambulance fee, and then it requires the county to distribute 15% of all of those fees to LFRDs. For FY24, about $20 million has been budgeted and about $3 million will be distributed to the volunteers. There are several reporting requirements. Those have been attached for your review. There's also draft resolution language in here that will go into our approved FY24 budget resolution on pages 16 and 17. These are included every year that require the distribution as well as the different reporting requirements. So now I'm offering 2 potential savings options. These are not easy, they're not quick. Given that the potential fiscal constraints on the county may face beginning in FY25 with a possible $145 million deficit, I'm offering 2 other options for longer term savings. And the first one is revisiting the law I just mentioned about EMST distribution requirements. If you wanted to stop distributing that 15% to LFRDs, the local fire and rescue departments, and instead maintain that funding within the combined service itself to be more precisely allocated to immediate needs, this would generate about $3 million a year to use. However, it would require a bill. It would require legislation in order to make that change. And then the second one, which I will list as a non-recommended reduction at this point, but I needed to bring it to your attention because it has been proposed in the past, is removing certain pieces of apparatus out of service. This has categorically been rejected by councils year after year after year, and there's a list on 16. However, and I just gave an example of some of the things that have been proposed for cuts. These change all the time. If this is something that the committee or council wants to look at, I recommend sending it back to the fire chief to look for the least impactful cuts. But I'm just going to say every cut is going to have a service impact and increase response times. And back in FY19, FY16, FY19, we didn't have as much information on racial equity. And we've got it now, and I will put that through a racial equity analysis. And just off the top of my head, in the places that they can cut, it would have a disproportionate impact to lower income communities of color. So I listed some additional information on racial equity and social justice. I will get that report to the full council, the new council. I just wanted to put out there that the department has been operationalizing racial equity initiatives, and they've got a really excellent report on the assessment of community risk, which examines different risk variables within the community and deals with part of the GARE approach in that. So in terms of council staff recommendations on page 18, I'm recommending that all the county executive tax-supported increases be placed on the list as high-priority reconciliation list items. If the committee chooses to retain facilities maintenance within the fire department, the corresponding reductions in DGS, council staff recommends placing these as high-priority changes as well, and they're listed in the first 3 items listed in red on that chart. And if the committee chooses to use ESPP funds that are budgeted this year for LFRDs to address structural overtime deficits, I'm recommending placing that as a high priority item as well. Again, that doesn't reduce or increase the overall department budget. It just better appropriates money to show what's actually happening within the department and could possibly save money from the reserves later in the year.
Okay. Well, first off, thank you very much. I think we probably should deal with the end of the discussion that you just had first. And but before we do that, I did want to ask the chief and anyone else if they had any discussions with us, please.
Mr. Katz, I want to rephrase your question.
Or any information that you'd like to give us.
As relates to the packet that we went through? Or?
Yeah, or in general, and we're going to go through, yeah, not to the world in general, Chief. Yeah.
No, I just...
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
We have sat across the table from each other for a while.
Yeah. And
indeed, staffing is a struggle. Any public safety agency, fire rescue, as specific as we're talking here, the pre-pandemic county stat report identified, the revision of what OLO had done about a decade prior that identified the staffing gap. Absolutely, I have been very staunch in my statement that there needs to be a balance between FTEs and overtime. With the original 180 identified in county stat, I have articulated that a 50%, roughly 90, is the right balance. So, as Susan outlined, in the successive budget years since, we've gained 30 positions towards that 90. That means our gap is still 60 based upon my 50%. Pandemic changed us. Workforce availability changed us. Other factors, as outlined in the packet, have been added to working rules or working conditions, which is another element to how it takes to staff positions 24/7. When it comes to the minimum staffing, absolutely. As I use a comparison to Ben Stevens and the folks at the jail as our best, comparable in county government, they have posts, we have apparatus seats. We have to have so many people in position each day to meet your expectations, to meet the community's expectations, which is what was on page 6 in that chart. Indeed, overtime has been utilized as a planned process to staff functions. We have sat here since 2013 and added positions only with overtime funding levels, and overtime at the appropriate level has been funded for that. Throughout the pandemic, we saw that, and in my last bit, I'm segueing this together, we saw the department's desire for working overtime lowered as well as their availability, and then our ability to staff our positions in the specific overtime roles. One quick example. The peak time EMS unit in Aspen Hill, we call it a flex unit. It's funded with overtime. That was my ask to the dais. That's what OMB supported and you all have funded. That's only overtime funded, no FTEs allocated to it. And in fire service, that's pretty much even 50-50 between funding the position on FTEs, funding the position on overtime. We're only able to staff that unit 75% of the time because we don't have people to work. Today, there is a force hold in the field, meaning of one of those 314 positions, a specialty position today as a hazardous materials officer was not allowed to go home because there was not a replacement in play. So on overtime positions, we're not going to force for that, but there's only about four days a week that we're able to fill that unit that's funded with overtime because we don't have people signed up. So far this year, we've had 21 days out of 110. So we're running about 20% of the days where we're running force holds. Some of those are specialties, some of those are general firefighter positions. In the listing of new positions being added, which as Susan outlined very well throughout the packet, we talked about the Reimagined Public Safety, the fire rescue, 2 surveys. The DEI officer is a position that we did not have before the pandemic. We utilized a team of uniformed folks in community engagement and an EEO role. This is a very different focus. This is a very different application. This is a professional civilian program manager 2 with experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion. A person who he or she can be aware of and be across our organization paying attention to how our operations work. And hopefully in future years that office can be added with a second uniformed member to be a part of that team. But the first step is a civilian professional to jump in there. As it gets into the elements on circle 11 and 12, or excuse me, page 11 and 12, the facilities component. Internally, OMB, Fire Rescue, and DGS met a year and a half ago. We started talking this with the beginning of the FY23 operating budget. At that time, the fire department had to ask for expanding the capabilities within the fire department for managing these LFRD or volunteer-owned work sites, as well as the programmatic requirements that we are responsible for on the 22 county-owned buildings. The request resulted in a go back and study. David's team, my team, we went back and studied. We compared work orders, we compared workload and information, and we provided a report back to OMB and to the executive. And what is in the budget in circle 11 or page 11 and 12 is a path by which all base building services will be performed by DGS staff, no matter if it's an LFRD owned building or if it's a county owned building. So using Kensington as an example, Station 25 and 18, county-owned Kensington buildings. Station 21 and 5, LFRD-owned. So the service at the station level will be done the same no matter who is the owner of the building. And that's what the proposal on page 12 outlines. FRS is still going to be and will be required to maintain this programmatic. Fancy word, but that means the furnishings, the appliances, the things that are in that building that are required by the collective bargaining agreement or the fire department function and operation that are not part of a general building environment. Look at the 4 walls here, and if it's not in this CEO council office building, but it is in a fire station, then that's what is considered programmatic.
If I could just add to that, which is the same practice for rec centers and libraries. The furniture, fixtures, and equipment microwaves in the staff break room and things like that are managed by the departments.
All right, and just as an aside, the county does not, I'm asking, I'm saying it as if I know it, but the county does not pay the volunteer department's rent. Is that correct?
No, sir.
That, you're saying?
No.
The
County does not pay the LFRDs for the.
So there is an expense that goes to them, and this way, this would take away from, this would help with their expense.
No, so in 2013, roughly, prior to that time frame, they managed all facilities.
They being the volunteers.
Volunteers. All facility operations. So the fire chief distributed tax money to each of the 19 LFRDs, and they did facilities maintenance and administrative and operational supply purchases. That was consolidated in roughly that 2013 timeframe to MCFRS's office level activity. So all facility maintenance is performed by people in Chief Cooper's office and staff. We use the same contractors that DGS uses. We use the same reporting mechanism. Again, one station may have a report to DGS's facilities number, and the adjacent station reports it to the fire rescue facilities number. So it's a little bit bifurcated because of who's the owner of the building. But the LFRDs for the last 10 years do not have any cost burden for maintaining the buildings, be it walls, windows, doors, lights, utilities, or anything of the such. They do somehow are very much engaged and use some of the support money that Susan outlined for building maintenance upgrades. Let's say new roofs, new doors, and some refurbishments or kitchen renovations or things like that. But the county, my office, my team, is responsible for soup to nuts building maintenance in those 25 volunteer-owned fire facilities.
So if, again, just while we're on it, this just brings everything under one roof with the depth and expertise that DGS has, and will also afford a tracking system in our new work order management and facility management system, so that we'll be able to work with the LFRDs on predictive maintenance of components within the buildings and major impacts that we would see as far as based on the work orders and repairs done at those facilities. And in the out years, this is a net zero impact. After the initial creation of this effect of this change, there's a zero impact in going into the future.
Rachel Silverman, OMB. Yeah, that's correct. We structured this in such a way so that when we're fully transitioned, the uniform captain has returned to the field, and the one-time equipment costs for the DGS positions are taken into account, and the ESPP support is considered. There is almost no impact on the general fund. But the interest really was in making sure that those uniform personnel that have been specially trained, highly trained to provide our fire and rescue service are concentrated in that way. We have our professional building staff dedicated to the building work, and all facilities are treated in the same way, whether they're LFRD or county-owned.
All right, so there's people that live in the stations. Can you all, can DGS respond quickly when there's an issue for someone that's for their home?
We do that with the county-owned stations now. So this is just
Okay.
replicating the same thing across all stations.
Okay. Go ahead, Chief. I don't know if you had anything else to.
That was the end of the comments, Mr. Katz, that I was going to provide after taking some notes during the first segment.
Well, first off, again, I know this is going to be your, we'll probably mention this again, but this is going to be your last budget. You've decided not to stay in Montgomery County, and we're all very, very sad about that, but we knew this day was coming. So you've done a marvelous job, and you deserve at least one round of applause, maybe one at the end as well. So. Thank you. And of course, the minimum staffing has been a problem for ever, as far as I can remember, and we certainly, and it's not just for bodies being there. There has to be different categories who are there, and different regiments. So we need to continue to work through that. We're not going to solve that today, but we can solve it with money. But I did want to get back in the beginning, Susan, to the whole idea for the using the EMST money, the
Is it EMST or ESPP?
ESPP, I'm sorry, money. I am not in favor of changing what we're doing. I believe that Montgomery County set up a deal, I guess it was the 15% deal, and the volunteers, really sincerely are one of the greatest bargains Montgomery County has. And so I'm not in favor of changing that. I don't know where my colleagues are on this moment, but.
I have some thoughts or questions. I have a bunch of things, but.
Do you, on this topic?
On
or?
that particular.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, whoa, sorry. I guess my question would be, the 15% number was something that was negotiated, not negotiated? And so my question would be, if there was to be a change where it would go into the general bucket, or is there opportunity for doing something that would allocate out in different percentages based on actuals? So you would look at the prior year's services and then use that as the base for the next year's allocations.
It's definitely a possibility, but to the first part of the question, indeed, there were, I'm going to use the word 3 attempts to pass an ambulance billing law.
Right.
And that final effort, the final attempt, which created this in 2013, outlined that 15%. So 15% of the net proceeds from ambulance billing, which is roughly $20 million a year, is then transmitted to the volunteer departments. There is language in the ambulance billing law that stipulates that money the ambulance billing money, in broad sense, the entire 20, cannot be used to supplant, can only be used in certain ways, but
right.
cannot be used to supplant things at the time as of FY 2013 or FY 13.
So
as it relates,
I was going to ask for the thou shalt not supplant provision. Does that only apply for what existed at the time the bill went into effect, or does it apply to anything that's budgeted thereafter that's a regular part of an operational budget that you cannot supplant?
so I'm going to use an example that I can't put the date on, but it definitely has occurred.
Okay.
Risk management fees and some other things have gone up. And in past years, we have utilized EMST revenue to fund the new gap on the on the risk management cost above what it was in FY13.
Okay.
So it cannot be used to supplant the level of funding provided by the tax base at 13. Rachel, okay, I'm getting head shakes. Okay,
Yeah,
so
okay.
I get that pretty well. But Ms. Dawn, the ESPP, which is the new state Medicare reimbursement component, not ambulance billing, that does not have any language pertaining to the 15% requirement. It's the executive's direction and decision to honor the 15% from ambulance billing with the ESPP money and provide that 15% to the LFRDs.
And is that decision because of the fact that it both relate to the billing, overall billing, although one is
It's
Medicaid
relatable to
related and one is
their ambulance fee stuff.
ambulance fee stuff.
Great language.
It works for me.
But it is not necessarily required. It was the executive's direction that we're going to apply the same EMS billing to EMS reimbursement.
Okay. I have one more question about
Okay.
the DGS piece.
But can we work on, are you?
On this,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I'm with Chair Katz on this issue, so I'll just keep. We could return to this another year possibly, but
Right, yes. Okay, and before you get to the other question, Susan, you had on the non-suggested list about the equipment and
Correct. I just felt I would be remiss if I didn't provide that opportunity to committee and council as far as apparatus reductions.
you are, in my opinion, you are absolutely right on that. Mark Elrich, when he sat in the chair for public safety as chair, and I sat on either side of him, he agreed with what you have suggested time and time again, and he was right at that point, and we need to continue to be right, not to change anything on that, as far as I'm concerned. So.
Yep.
Okay, we're good.
Oh, you had a question, you had a comment? Comment, question?
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I hear what you're saying on that in terms of service delivery, but you have a fire department with a ton of really bright people, and what we've seen over the past couple of years is a decided shift away from just using historical representations of the universe and starting to use things like data to really demonstrate where our value propositions are and how we can best leverage existing assets against, let's call them sticky problems, yeah? And I think that instead of a wholesale shutting of the door, that it's probably wise to leave the door open for considering ways that we can take services and make adjustments to them in the future while still delivering the same level of value to the communities and the same capabilities to the communities. It just may look different, but at the end result or the outcome would be similar. So I would just caution to leave that door open a little bit.
And I appreciate that, and I think that's logical. I don't believe we were going to do it during budget. I think that needs to be something that we come back to, that we're talking money here, and I don't know that if you shifted things, that money would necessarily be that big a change. So I believe, and I think we're at 3-0 on that one as well. But I appreciate, and Ms. Frog, if you could make a note that the committee would like to come back to having a discussion at some other after budget time. Okay? And so I interrupted you, please.
Oh, so I was going to ask about the DGS shift this year, and I think you touched upon the capacity issue, and you explained that that there were costs that were front-loaded, and that's why we would not be recognizing a savings by making this shift right now. But at times, of course, it's hard to say, so you promise you're not coming back here for fiscal year 25 and showing me another number? So could you get into that a little bit more as to why to do this now when we're in the financial state we're in versus delaying that if there is a cost to it right now as opposed to a cost savings?
What I would say is that Fire and Rescue had identified a deficit in terms of what they could provide with their existing resources. They requested that we accommodate an increase in their resources, and so the county executive and this partnership between Fire and DGS took a step back and tried to examine, the best, most efficient and effective way to address that need. And the determination was that allocating 5 professional staff like an HVAC and a plumber, an electrician, property manager, people that can get in buildings and do the stuff was the most effective way to address that problem.
I have other questions, but they're not related to that.
I'm okay with
Yeah.
that one as well.
Yeah.
And so we're at 3-0 on that one, Susan. Okay. Yes.
Clarification, 3-0 on the county executives.
Yes, as was written or as was proposed.
As proposed.
Yeah. Okay. So, Susan, to be efficient here, should we go through each area and then have people comment then? Do you want it in general? What would be the way you would like to handle this?
So what's left are the 11 positions, right? Did anybody have questions?
Well, then let's go to Councilmember Lukey, please. Go ahead.
So, thank you for pointing out the need for the position related to SISM. And I just wanted to know, what have you all been doing now in terms of like when there's a large scale event, even with the funding for the additional psychologist and social worker, what other, I'm assuming other services are being provided, or whether they're voluntary or done in some other way to provide that type of programming for our responders.
Absolutely. So as outlined on page 8, the unit today has one full-time licensed psychiatrist and one clinical social worker. The FY23 budget brings on 2 more people in that unit. Administrative professional to assist with the documentation and case management, and then a 3/4 time licensed care provider. Those folks are in the midst of being hired as we speak. Additionally, when we were here in the beginning of 23, we talked about a facility consolidation, getting a mental health suite. That suite is now open and has been is being moved into. So that's what is occurring in the last 12 months. The OLO report on county government mental health of responders is what is our roadmap, or what we're using to segue from as these requests are submitted. The current CISM, or Critical Incident Stress Team Management, is done by a captain as a collateral duty to his regular work duty set.
Okay.
He does a superb job at that and is on the street every 3rd day running calls in response to the community's needs. This role brings him or her, whoever gets this position, into the staff job to support that and then be a part of what would become that 5-person office team at the suite. Again, when we laid out the ad for 23, one of our key takeaways for the new licensed professional was to get into proactive, preventative outreach and training. Right now, we're managing the call load and the volume of the emergencies of our staff, but we're not able to, that team is not able, the team of 2 is not able to get out and schedule outreach, station visits, dialogue, provide preventative education and training. So that's part of what we're going to be doing with this 23. And when we get the full-time SISM captain there as well, that just expands that capability for that team to do preventative as well as reactive and responsive.
Thank you. No, I know. I mean, I think you know personally that that's really important to me. But you know, that's really great to hear, and is critically important to the department as a whole. The other question I had was, I know we were talking about filling positions and discuss the fire and rescue course that MCPS has available for students to participate in. That was not running for a little bit. Is that like was it just during COVID that it was not available, or had it been offline for longer than that?
For longer.
Okay.
So and when we started, I made a note that I didn't have a document with me. COVID did stop us with the pandemic. 2018 is when the cadet program restarted. We were in our 2nd school year when COVID kicked in. We had been offline for about 10 years. It was the other downturn, you know, a decade prior, where MCPS and FRS, you know, collectively said we had to, you know, reduce that capability. So it was about a 10-year period where the cadet program was offline. Through Dr. Smith and his team's dialogue, we got it back online for the, you know, what was the 18-19 school year, and we were in our 2nd cycle when the pandemic struck. We are now back on for what is now known as the 22-23 calendar school year. We have 21 people in the EMT course right now, which is amazing. It was enough that we started a morning and an afternoon session with MCPS back in September. That is, as outlined in the packet on page 9, the intent is that an EMT student does that during their 12th grade school year, and they do the fire training during their 11th grade school year. Why? It's predominantly tied towards their 18th birthday and their legal capacity to be a service provider. You can take the class like I did prior to your 18th birthday, but you're not able to be a licensed care provider until you're a licensed adult. So the segue question is, come this time next year, we will be looking at our first wave of students post the pandemic and the first wave practically for 15 years that will have had both Fire 2 and EMT. How to get them an early step into the hiring process.
Yeah.
I use the word intern just because we already have cadet and recruit as two different phrase words. I'd like to, and my team has been challenged to figure out with OHR, how can we create an intern position for these people at the end of June when they graduate from one of the county high schools to then be able to come to work for FRS, to have a school to career pipeline that's announced in a part of that scheme, process. And then if our battle rhythm of recruit training continues, we start classes in July and in January. So their gap would be very limited. And they already would have roughly 20 weeks of the 26 weeks training completed. But if something slides with that, I want to have a way to secure them a job, secure them an interested position in the community. So we've got a few months to iron that out before this time next year, when that group will become our first folks that are eligible, but that is my intent.
And would they be able to do like an abbreviated, since they already have, they could do an abbreviated set of class at MIFRE to get you to the final?
PTI, previously trained individuals, is part of the phrase we use. If we're hiring somebody who already has Fire 2 and EMT certification, they will then get recertified. They will then get their driver's training. They will then get their specialty hazardous materials and other classes, roughly 4 to 6 weeks. But yeah, that would be the objective to that.
And I think those are all.
And I think we should call it paid intern.
Absolutely.
I think
Yes.
we have to be very clear that we're going to pay them to do what we need them to be doing.
Yep.
Okay, is that good?
That's it, thank you.
Please.
Thanks for those great questions. All I have to add to that actually is I'm just going to note that as we're talking about pipelines and opportunities for our high school kids and to bring them into our public workforce in this way, that we should return to that conversation, I think, with the E&C committee, where, of course, we're talking about, with Montgomery College and with USG to kind of create more pipelines and pathways, and we want all of our high school students to have a broad picture of the full menu of options before them. Of course, we know that there are some students who know where they're going from first grade, but there's a lot of students who don't, and so there's an equity issue there, and there's also a tremendous opportunity for providing these different pathways for kids and making sure that they're able to have that vision starting early in their high school career. And so, as we talk with MC and USG, we've got the Ready Institute coming together. I think that this should be part of that same conversation, because from the perspective of the students, of the clients, they don't care, which entity is kind of, putting the pipelines together. We need for them to early on say, like, here's the full menu of all these wonderful options that I have before me, and just make sure that that is a clear and easy path for them. So I'm just going to mention that.
If I can just add to that, because it came up at the TE committee, DGS Fleet has also initiated initially a very successful internship program with MCPS and Montgomery College for fleet mechanics, because heavy equipment and fleets are not what they once were. And now we're talking about young people learning about electronics and high voltage motors and cool Star Wars but very deadly type stuff. Diesel mechanics are not the same thing anymore, but that's an internship program that's also the county's undertaken.
The more we can do that, the better off we all are, and the student and the county. Yep. Go ahead, please.
That's it.
That was it?
Yep,
Okay.
that's it. Yep, easy peasy.
So, Susan, we're getting back to the 11 positions, as that was the question. I believe that we should do that, that it should be, and I guess high priority, but go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, they're funded with ESPP funds.
Oh, I don't believe we should be doing it with those funds.
Well, I mean, that's how
No,
it,
that's how they are.
yeah, that's how it, they're supposed to be done. It's not taking from the volunteers.
Right.
Okay, all right, I'm
This is
confused.
the percentage
Okay.
that stays within the department.
right,
That they've
what-
identified this enhancement of services using ESPP funding.
Yeah,
All right. Good. I'm fine.
you're not rocking the boat.
Yeah, I'm
No.
not. And I got confused on
That's
all the
okay.
initials. And saying that, can you, and I meant to ask this, from, FROMs, what is that?
Fire and Rescue, Occupational Medical Services. The rest of county government has occupational medical services,
I see.
and this is just a broken out version of that.
I did Google it, couldn't come up with it, so and then I forgot to ask, so.
At 255 in the past, there were two separate doors. There was an OMS door and then there was a FROMS door. With the move to 27 Courthouse, it's all consolidated, because behind the patient waiting rooms, it is the same team
I see.
of occupational medical contractors performing the services.
I gotcha.
And you'll be in there with a truck driver and a firefighter and a police officer just doing different parts of that process. But FROMS is the occupational medical for fire rescue.
I got you.
And the committee may be interested in looking at that. We retroed a new space over in the old Great Courthouse. And it's really a very nice space. So you're welcome.
Is it actually finished now?
Oh, they've been using it. Yeah, it's fully occupied, underway.
We've been for about a year now.
Yeah, quite nice. So if you'd like a tour, we can arrange it.
We would, I think the committee would like to do that, please. Anything else, Ms. Frog? Again, Chief, we are sorry to see you go. You're beyond, you came here filling very large shoes. You had some people, and you knew them, who were terrific chiefs. And you certainly took it to where they were and a little beyond. It was tough to take it even beyond, but you did. And we sincerely, sincerely thank you for all of your efforts. And yeah, the state of Washington's gain is their loss, I can tell you.
We got two more packets to get through, so can
Yeah, I
you?
was just going
Yeah.
to say, you can't let go of them.
All right.
Yeah, you can't leave yet.
All right, so I was just kidding. The other two packets aren't really not going to take too long, but anyhow, go ahead, please.
Thank you. The second one is a March 15th amendment to the White Flint Fire Station project. The committee already reviewed the January 15th amendment, which had delayed construction by a year to provide additional capacity in FY24. This amendment to March 15th would delay the project another year. Construction would be programmed to begin September 2026 and project completion anticipated in 2028. You had this conversation at length during the March 15th work session. I had recommended not delaying the project. I'm recommending that again today.
And I'm in good with that. Are you? Are you?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get rid of the chief pretty soon here. Go ahead, yeah.
And the last item for fire is the supplemental appropriation. This is addressing, again, the structural overtime deficit within the department. There are a couple of operational issues that are being addressed as well, and that's on page 2, the breakdown. The total supplemental appropriation is for $10.4 million. Approximately $8.3 million of that is for overtime. Council staff is recommending approval as submitted.
And I'm good with that. Yes, and we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chief, we're going to get you your round of applause. Could everybody please join me one more time? Thank you. All right, and now we're going to go to our fourth item when Ms. Farag gets to leave, and we're going to ask Ms. Wellens to please join us. And I'll ask the panel to please introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer.
Good afternoon, Marcus Jones, Chief of Police.
Good afternoon, David Reed, Assistant Commander of Silver Spring Station.
I think we saw some of you gentlemen last night, as a matter of fact. You just live in this building. first off, this discussion is on the late night, excuse me, business safety plan, Bill 1423. And I want to, as we begin, very publicly thank the council president who was involved in this, the county executive has been involved in this and his group, Councilmember Stewart, Councilmember Chawando, Dr. Stoddard has been directly involved, the chief, and others have been involved with it as well as we go through this. And I want to thank Ms. Wellens very publicly for every time we looked at something, somebody else says, hey, how about this one? And we are doing our best to try to come up with a safer situation for all involved throughout Montgomery County. But this was prompted by, originally, by some of the concerns that we've had in Silver Spring for late night businesses. So with that, if Ms. Wellens, did you want to lead us through? Or?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Katz, and thank you, council members. So before you is Bill 1423, Police Late Night Business Safety Plan. As you know, this bill was introduced by the council president at the request of the county executive. Mr. Chair, would you like me to dive straight into
I think that's the only way we can do this.
Items? Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to bring your attention to page 4 of the staff memorandum that you have. And this issue number 2 is the beginning of their myriad, potential amendments for your consideration. And as the chair stated, they, Dr. Stoddard had helped talking through some of these, and I know many council members have been involved in hard thinking about ways to improve the bill. The first amendment for your potential consideration deals with the definition of business under the bill. As you know, late night businesses, as defined under the bill, would be required to get approval of late night business plans. And so narrowing down on that definition even further, what is a business that would be part of a late night business? And that's what this issue goes to. As originally introduced, the definition was that a business would mean a business that has an other tobacco products retailer license, a food license, or a liquor license where the products sold are meant to be or are regularly consumed on site. The potential amendment for your consideration by Chair Katz, Councilmembers Chawando and Stewart, and Council President Glass was to delete the language that said that they're meant to be or regularly consumed on, and instead try to bring some more clarity to that point by indicating that the consumption would be occurring at tables or at other designated areas for consumption. In other words, if you're a gas station and someone, incidentally is eating a candy bar inside your convenience store, that doesn't make you a late night business or a business that would be potentially subject to this law. Then the other change was to include, looking forward, that if the business had a license for on-site cannabis consumption from the state, they would also be brought under the ambit.
Okay. Go ahead.
Questions? So would this apply to a 24-hour Denny's, for example?
Yes.
And would this apply to a 24-hour McDonald's, for example? So I'm trying to ascertain what the scope or intended scope of this was, and whether those types of businesses are ones where we feel there's a public safety need to address, or whether there are not. And it may very well be, that even an establishment like that, which isn't necessarily serving alcohol or isn't open for cannabis consumption, is still problematic. But that's a question for you also. Could you speak to that a little bit?
So, again, if it's within that police reporting area where we're having, significant issues of late night, disturbances and the like, and we show that trend in those police reporting area, in that particular police reporting area, where, example, that establishment would be, would be a part of. And again, again, we would be identifying all of the businesses within, not discriminating against any particular business, right?
I think one of the concerns or questions, and this relates to a second amendment that we're going to discuss in a hot second, but looking at that through the lens of whether this is going to be just for something that's already been designated as a priority area, or whether by the very definition of creating those priority areas, we're not necessarily being as equitable as we might need to be, even though we know that is a place that needs assistance, right? So that is undisputed, and I wholeheartedly recognize the need to take action to help in that area. But to the extent that the next thing we talk about comes out in a different way, we may need to revisit the definition of business to make sure the net is not cast overly broadly. Does that make sense? So, okay.
Earl, did you jump in? I couldn't tell.
I was going to make the same point that the good councilwoman has made. So
very good. So how would we change, or the for the definition of business? I'm fine keeping it as is suggested to go to full council.
As suggested, meaning the amendment?
The amendment that we have, that's written before us.
Yep.
I'm fine to go to full council with that and have the good conversation there. I do believe that we should discuss, as part of this, the elimination of the words priority area, because I think we have seen in the last several weeks concerns about areas beyond the original discussion. So, yes, go ahead, Dr. Stoddard.
So the reason why we actually didn't even attempt to target this as a downtown Silver Spring bill is because, frankly, the areas that we saw last weekend, we had identified as areas prior to this. There's at least, I won't name an establishment, there are a few that have had past problems in areas outside of downtown Silver Spring, which is, an important recognition that it's not solely
right.
It's not, there was never intended to be a Silver Spring bill. So we agree wholeheartedly that, and so, we never envisioned that the priority areas would only be limited to Silver Spring. There is no, just so we're clear, the county executive has no concerns about changing it beyond priority areas. There's no concerns about that, but I do think it will greatly impact the definitions of everything else if you expand it more broadly, because obviously, I know we talked about it with council staff, hospitals, all for 24. Like, there are other unintended potential locations that get caught up in this if you broaden it full county without priority areas, which is, again, not a bad thing. It just may need some additional couching language to narrow.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So, in my mind, and this is why we're having this discussion, help me figure this out, but if we removed a food license from the top part, we wouldn't be catching the hospital cafeteria. We wouldn't be catching, because they're not selling liquor and they're not having a license for on-site cannabis consumption, right? So if you take out just because right now it's a food license or any of those things, right? So for a place that solely serves food 24 hours a day, if we removed food license and we took out priority areas so that it applied more broadly, so that because what will happen is, as a new priority pops up, you're already behind the 8 ball if you're waiting for a new priority area to be identified, rather than having something that applies more broadly, lets everybody who's running businesses between a certain time with this type of consumption, minus the food perhaps, depending on how everybody feels about that, take a look now and be proactive rather than reactive after they're being told, look, you've got stuff flaring up here.
I think we could take out food. I don't know that food...
I would certainly welcome Captain Reed to chime in on this. There are a few food-only establishments where we have had issues, principally in locations where the bars and/or later area activities let out. Those places become places where people gather after consuming, and issues arise. And so, and
I got it.
yes,
All right,
so
if
that's the
we
only concern.
said, rather to the, I mean, a hospital's cafeteria, they might have vending machines open, but but the cafeteria wouldn't be open. If we said that, that they had service directly to the public, I don't know how you'd word it, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, hospitals and hotels were the two that we conceptually thought of, where a hotel might have a continental breakfast that might fall into the area, and we obviously did not intend for this legislation to cover those. Right, right, and so we just were, we're cognizant of the same things the council is, which we don't want this to become. We don't want businesses that get swept up in this because we poorly defined it, and so obviously I think this is obviously the council's decision, but I do think we could do some additional work between this work session and a full council session to further couch some language that we work with you.
Yeah, all good. I mean, it's tricky. I certainly think that it makes more sense to draw the limits around types of business as opposed to geographically. Even when we're doing that, it's just going to be really hard to draw those boundaries, and it's this balance between unnecessary burden on various businesses. Versus a problem that you're trying to solve. I don't know if you have, Dr. Stoddard, or anyone who's, I know everyone's kind of been involved in the drafting of this and the amendments, but thoughts about using this method as opposed to just sticking to a voluntary grant kind of incentive, carrot versus stick, or carrot versus carrot and stick.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that there are some establishments that we know are bad actors in this space. There are places that have problems that are not bad actors and who have worked with us, but there are some establishments where there have been problems where the owner operators aren't interested in working with the county, and I do not believe that they would avail themselves of any opportunity that we offer. And those are probably the places that would benefit most from having a plan or a strategy to address the issues that emerge from their establishments. And so it's a balancing of, again, you don't want to catch up too many businesses in a requirement, but you also want to make sure you require it of the businesses that would the public and the business itself would stand to gain the most from, despite their lack of interest. There are many businesses, frankly, that are already doing this voluntarily, and I think that's worth pointing out. And we've seen tremendous success. We've talked about what Jason Muscuri has done at Society. There's still not been a call for service in Society. I did a ride along in downtown Silver Spring last weekend on the 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. Talked to was Officer Boone, who's a four-year veteran of our force, and he said, he's a frontline officer. He doesn't deal with the legislation crafting. He just deals with what happens during his shift in his beat. He said, I haven't been in Society for any reason in the last year, and I really appreciate the work that then Lieutenant, now Captain Reed has done to work with the owner of this establishment. And so if we felt like businesses were going to do this voluntarily, we would not be here. Right. We've made that effort to reach out to those businesses to try and work with them and not have there be legislation required. But because we've seen such great success in those who have voluntarily done it, we know that there's benefit to everyone doing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then I oh, sorry, did you want to?
I just wanted to add that when we initially started doing this, when we started talking about food, was because places were staying open until 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, parallel and what the other establishments were doing, keeping them in the area. Street racing became a problem, violence in the street became a problem, and the only thing that when we talked about that I mentioned prepared food, that when you're openly preparing food that would mitigate the like the hospital where you have vending machines and stuff like that, so that it kind of encompasses, but it also like Dr. Stoddard said, we're not singling out any individual business, but it's a safer way to do business for all. And the majority of the businesses I have went down and talked to are all for it. And the ones that have worked with me, and I've went in and we've talked about security measures and professionally training their security staff and handheld metal detectors. I mean, I have documentation after documentation. We have stopped guns from going into these businesses.
Yep.
And the security personnel have worked with the police, pointed them out, that we have made arrests on scene. And there is, and I can't say enough about Jason and CK and the rest of the owners down there that have really understood that by working together, we bring in the patrons. And a little money up front now is going to flood their business, and they understand that.
Keeps it safer.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so much of what I'm hearing. I think, you know, the fact that it was done voluntarily is part of, you know, is part of one of the ingredients that helped it to work. You know, when you have folks who are excited to work in partnership and are, you know, willing to have those types of conversations, and then the implementation goes better, and then you're seeing that success, and you're able to continue to have feedback and improve upon what, you know, all of the things that having open dialogue, you know, the benefits there. And, you know, obviously the ideal is that we could get everybody who would benefit from that to participate in that kind of dialogue. And I certainly hear what you're saying, that like we can't convince everybody to do it because we have some bad actors, and so those are the handful of people who we want to try to we're going to make them fit into this mold. Is there an incentive that would be attractive enough that would, you know, if it's a handful of bad actors, is there an incentive that would be attractive enough that would shift them into that kind of voluntary compliance model that you've seen so much success from, and that would kind of then help us alleviate this problem of sweeping up other businesses?
I think you'd almost have to sit and wait and see how this progresses. Because if someone is, you know, we're using the term bad actor, if someone is not doing what they should be doing, and they find success in not, you know, in doing the things that they're the way that they're running their business. I don't know that they're, you know, that we can incentivize them enough to say, you know, you should be a good community member. I mean, you know, the award's not going to help them. But I think this is like secondhand smoke to me. Mm-hmm. It's not just the people that are doing it that could be, you know, harming their health. It's their neighbors and everybody else. And it's not fair for the people who are truly trying to do what's right to allow the others to go forward and cause all the problems, not only for the other businesses, but for the people that are living right there. I mean, you know, we heard people say that the buildings that they were living in were shot at night. I mean, nobody wants to live in that situation. Please, Captain.
Sir, I just want to say that, you know, we have not alienated anybody, because every time we have what we call our Nighttime Business Owners Alliance that we meet quarterly, talk about things, we've had our meetings with the community, we've invited them. Please come, hear what the community has to say, hear what we have to say, hear the success stories, and they refuse to come. So we continue to throw out the life preserver to bring them in. And I said, I'll meet you. If you're only open at 4 o'clock in the morning, I will come down at 4 o'clock in the morning and I will meet with you. And so we've let them know, and I've actually talked to the business owners. I'm like, you have to understand, if something happens in your establishment, it's not John Doe that did it. It's your business that is going to be the headline news. And a lot of people get it, and they want to see that change.
Well, and I think that the carrot is, this is positive risk management, right? Any business should recognize that in operating a business, you should be proactive and preventive rather than dealing with it after it comes, because after it comes is when the headlines have already happened, and you know, and we're already in a bad spot. The other thing is, though, and this is something that, you know, is for later in the piece, but just there isn't really a stick in the way this is written. There's nothing that says, here's what's going to happen if you don't do your plan by a certain date. And I know it allows for regulatory authority to be developed as to what this looks like, but somewhere in there has to be an actual stick for those for whom the pushes and the prodding and the suggestions of, hey, we're here to help you, haven't worked thus far. And these emergency plans and things don't need to be, you're not writing War and Peace, right? They're not that long. They're really not. And, you know, I've read many an emergency response plan in my lifetime prior to coming here. They don't have to be that long, but they have to be done.
I thought you were going to say you read War and Peace many times.
I have not read War and Peace.
Dr. Stoddard, did you?
Yeah, so the penalty for a violation of this type would be essentially $500 but it's a violation is a day that you are out of compliance. So it could be a fine of $500 a day for the period of your.
And if someone is selling liquor, they could lose their liquor license. There's all of those.
One thing that, because we've heard discussions about why don't we just close all businesses at 2 o'clock in the morning, moving forward, which, again, the county executive has heard that and he does not agree. He thinks we can work with businesses and make them safe, and there are plenty of well-meaning, good actors in the space that operate all hours of the day who we would not want to close arbitrarily because they happen to be open after 2 o'clock in the morning. There are some that are not, and obviously they are creating a negative environment for their fellow businesses. So, but one other thing that is available to us from, we talked to the county attorney about this, is if there's someone who's repetitively in violation of, we could go to court and say, we need an abatement order, and that abatement order could essentially say you cannot operate during these hours because you have not followed this legislation. And so the legislation itself would give us another vehicle in court through which to pursue a specific closure of a business who refuses to participate in a program.
Well, and I think my wish list here is that are you listening, communications offices? So for both the county executive's office and for the council office, once we can wrap this up and make this happen, that exactly what you just said gets put in the article so that everybody is informed of what can happen, how it can happen, and what the consequences are, so that everybody knows what was done collectively to try and resolve these ongoing issues and to make sure we're all on the same page.
Go ahead, Captain, please.
Sir, I was just going to add that every citizens I've talked to that were adamant, they wanted the businesses that live close to these establishments, wanted them shut down at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. But once I started selling this legislation, we said we feel this is a good middle ground to not only support the businesses, but support your neighborhood. And they all agreed. But they were all, again, told me as long as they follow the plan. Right. And I think if we do that, then we will start bridging that gap between the citizens that live in the area and the businesses themselves.
And sometimes, it's that old story that you have to hit somebody across the nose to let them understand that they have to be listening. And hopefully something like that, by working with the businesses, by working with the community, this is not government attempting to be onerous on them. This is government saying, we want everybody to have a better situation for everyone involved. So anyhow.
Mr. Chair, if I could just.
Yeah, please.
Briefly, I just wanted to add as well as, as much as we've had some success in the 3rd district, in Silver Spring, I would say that there's also been some complaints in problem areas elsewhere in the county. And so I want to make sure that, again, understanding that, there's been a significant, I wouldn't say push, but there's been clearly, we have more urban areas, and they are more attractive to our citizens that allows them to go out and have a good time in the late night hours. But again, though there have been businesses in the 3rd district that have been very cooperative, I would not say it's always been that with the other businesses in other districts. So I just want to make sure the committee is aware, and as we, again, understanding that this law is going to, if it passes, it will be impactful as we move forward, because the county continues to grow and the nightlife continues to grow as well. And I just want to make that point.
And I think that's fair. And that's not just recent. We've had you've been around long enough to know that there were some establishments outside of Silver Spring that caused a lot of excitement. You kept you all in business a lot of nights. Yeah. So I think I believe, correct me, it's never if I'm wrong, it's when I'm wrong. I believe we're going to leave food in, but we're going to try to figure out how to word that if someone is serving food or what was your term?
Yeah, I think so. For example, McDonald's that's open 24 hours, they technically have a food license, but typically when they're open 24 hours, the dining in portion is closed and you can only pick it up at the drive-through. So perhaps if it just has some caveat added to the license to serve food piece that makes sure that it is also serve, at that time, that is consumed on premises during the hours applicable to the bill. Does that make sense? Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll commit to working with our business team to look at, because I obviously wanted to see what the amendments that were accepted were. We can work with our business team to potentially identify anything else that might be caught up in this, and we can probably suggest some language or work with council staff on some language that would potentially narrow it to those businesses that we're obviously all intending it to be.
Okay. So are we good?
Yeah. I mean, and I'll just note that there might be other ways we come up with that it makes sense to further limit which businesses that this applies to. And so I think that's a good one, and I'll just leave it open to if other people have ideas about that. We should keep putting our heads together so that we can mitigate the impact on businesses who don't.
I will say this whole piece of legislation, we've had people that have truly worked together, not always came in the beginning to get to the table at the same thoughts, but everybody is willing to try to blend this puzzle together to come up with a good solution, and that in itself is makes you feel good. But anyhow, so we're at what number now? We're at.
Yes, thank
we're
you.
At number,
So correct. So for issue number 2 that
Yes.
you just discussed, definition of business, just to clarify so that I'm clear on the staff level, you're going with the definition that's set forth here with the caveat that we're going to work with the executive staff to see if additional language is needed in order to exclude businesses such as drive-throughs, hotels, hospitals, other places that aren't intended to be included.
In a grocery store, I mean, if it's open all night, so,
Okay, thank you. So then going into, really issue number 3 and issue number 4 continue to wrestle with, which businesses this bill would apply to. So issue number 3 relates to something you've already discussed which is the priority areas, whether this bill would apply in priority areas of the county or county-wide. And then number 4, I'm just going to mention it because, as you discuss all these things meld together, is, the hours of operation that would be implicated in the definition of late night business. And there are a couple of potential options set forth there for you that I can, walk through if you'd like me to, Mr. Chair.
Well, let's do those two together. It's going to get confusing anyhow, but I'm for taking out the words priority areas. I think that all we're doing is when the issue as the issue moves down the street, then we need to be dealing with that. We don't need to have new legislation. So I think we should take out the words priority areas. I don't know where others are. We're good?
I feel that way.
Okay. So we're good on that, Christine? Okay. So that's number 3, basically. Number 4, the definition of a late night business. Councilmember Jawan.
It's the 2 time frames.
There's 2 different time frames. Councilmember Jawando would like midnight to 5. Councilmember Stewart, Council President, and me believe it should be 2 to 5. And my logic for that was that a restaurant, in many cases, that's open past midnight, unless they've caused a problem. If they've caused a problem, that brings us to another issue. But if they haven't caused a problem, I don't know why they need to be being involved directly in this legislation. So I believe, and the reason we came up with 5 is there are diners that'll open up so that people who are going to a construction job or whatnot, they open their restaurant at 5 o'clock in the morning to get that trade. They certainly haven't created the problem. So that's where I am.
So I have a question.
So
I taking these 2 together and, do I really think that at 2:01 a.m. a clock starts ticking that wasn't already present potentially? I understand and
You have to
appreciate.
have a line somewhere.
I guess, and, but my question about the language in option 2 says alleged serious incidents occurring on the premises, and I know that there's a definition that's recommended in there about what serious incident is. It says an alleged crime identified as a serious incident by the department in Method 2 regulations. My question is about, or my concern is about alleged versus charged. And why that choice, or can somebody elaborate on that?
So we discussed, obviously, there are many instances where charges can be lessened despite the incident having been serious. And so if you connect it to charges, what we did here was very much, we don't want concerned resident who was not in the establishment calling 911 to report an incident.
Right.
And so in our discussions with what the regulations would read is there would have to be some evidence that suggested the incident began or took place inside the establishment.
So understanding and recognizing that it is an entirely common practice within criminal law to charge a lesser offense.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to phrase this so that it's where a serious incident occurred that could have been charged as?
I think the executive is supportive of language that you all can determine that you think it provides sufficient flexibility. I think we're all in agreement on the intent, which is not to have someone stole my purse become a serious incident.
Correct.
But if there was a shooting, a stabbing, a fight that resulted in people being transported to things of serious nature that occurred in the establishment, that it would be intended as a serious incident, and then 2 of those in a calendar year would automatically connect you. I think defining what serious incident means and how exactly you qualify there is a reasonable discussion, but I think we're comfortable with narrowing that in whatever way the council thinks.
The only reason I raised this is because I ended up having so much heartburn, so much heartburn at the Center for School Safety over the definition of a critical life-threatening incident, where not everybody could get on the same page with that. We wrote regulations, they still wouldn't get on the same page with that. And so having been down that road before, want to make sure, and again, knowing it's not always possible, and sometimes you got to go loop back and tweak it later, but that we are using something that gives enough guardrails to what is meant. Yeah. Because I think for us, we all kind of would have I would probably have the same notion based on your regulations as to what that is and when it would happen, but the businesses need to know that, and the public needs to know that. So anything that you could do to help clean that up would be great.
And I think we said that originated from the inside. So if somebody's having a fight and you say take it outside, they still are. It originated with them, though they might not have hit each other inside the building.
Yeah, I think this is we're gonna have to talk a little bit about the definitions, because obviously if you just take the incident that occurred last week in 2nd District, that was a non-contact shooting that originated from a conflict that started in the establishment, correct, Chief Jones?
Right.
And so while the non-contact shooting did not occur in the establishment, the incident began there. And so the question really becomes does the serious crime have to have occurred in the establishment, or does the incident have to be that? I think we would like some clarity on what that.
And I'll give you an example that came up in the critical life-threatening hair-splitting arena. Last year, right at the beginning of the school year, there was a need for a swiftwater rescue of children and a bus driver off a school bus due to a flash flooding episode, not here in Montgomery County. Just want to clarify that for everybody listening at home. And they refused to have an after-action meeting with the agency, and they refused to write the report because they said, well, nobody actually got hurt. And I said, well, obviously it must have been a life-threatening incident if you engaged in a swiftwater rescue maneuver.
And they were.
And right? That's the kind of stuff I want to avoid here. So,
You could have a non-contact shooting inside of an
Correct.
establishment that I would
Correct.
consider serious, and I think everyone here would consider a serious incident.
exactly.
Just because the perpetrator had poor aim doesn't
Right.
mean it wasn't.
Shouldn't get you off the
Yeah,
hook.
just because we got
Correct.
lucky, yeah. Now, are you going?
Yeah. Okay, I appreciate this discussion, and I have some concerns about, I'm just like not seeing a path to a language here that I feel like is going to cover the many different scenarios that we are going to be, there's just going to be so many different variables at play here. We're going to have people mad at each other for the outcomes, then the business is going to have the impact of the outcome of whoever decides, okay, this started inside or this started outside. Well, now there's not just legal implications there for the people involved. Now there's also, the implications for the business about whether they have to do the safety plan thing or not. It's just going to get, I just feel like it's just going to get real sticky. And it's going to be very tough to come up with the language that's going to give us like clear black and white answers to these questions. And I just feel like it's going to put a lot of us in tough situations, and noting that ultimately what we're doing with all of these pieces is trying to figure out how we're going to basically limit the scope so that we don't impact too many businesses. And so we talked about how using geography is not really a method that is going to necessarily, that doesn't make a ton of sense for us. I don't know that this is one that makes a ton of sense for us either, or that there's that much benefit to trying to jump through all of the different hoops and legalese that might land us in I think we're still going to end up with a bunch of situations that we would rather not deal with. Some people are going to say it started inside. Some people are going to say it started outside. What if you got a bunch of community members saying it started inside, and an officer says, well, I've deduced that it starts outside. Well, now you're going to have a whole thing in the news about that. The business is going to have an opinion because it's going to impact. You know what I mean? I just feel like we're setting ourselves up for a lot of arguments, and I'm also noting that these two amendments are not that far off, because in both of them, all of the businesses from 2 to 5 are included. And then in both of them, at least some businesses from 12 to 2 are included. I don't really know the numbers on how many more businesses that is, but it's feeling worthwhile from my perspective to just say, if we want to include, if we feel like that is a problem time period, then let's just include all of the 12 to 2s there. And then we don't have to deal with it's just setting us up for a lot of fights between different parties that I think we don't need. And there's just issues there.
Go ahead.
So the delineation around 2 a.m. is obviously is most important because that's the liquor licensure limitation. Mm-hmm. And so any establishment that operates, obviously we do not have bars in Montgomery County, but any restaurant that operates similar to a bar in that it stays open that late will be covered. So if you're doing it countywide, I don't have the numbers. We could certainly get them, but the number of establishment that would be impacted by going from midnight to 2 a.m. would be several orders of magnitude larger than just including 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. So I just want to make clear about the overall prospect of how it would impact. Now, obviously, I think with regard to limiting it to just 2 to 5, I think the question also becomes, there are businesses that are open 2 to 5 right now that don't have many issues, but there are certainly some businesses that are operating between 12 and 2 that have had, I don't know how many have had multiple serious incidents last year. I'm actually not sure that there's any business that would necessarily qualify today as meeting this definition. So it would be pretty narrow. We'd have to look, but it's
probably low.
It's a very small number of businesses that would even qualify under any language that we would develop. But for example, if depending on how we define it, if there were, if you had multiple serious incidents in a summer, let's say, next summer you would have to have the safety plan in place. And so I think the biggest challenge will be is if you're looking about this in terms of the angst about businesses. I'd imagine you may feel the same angst from some businesses that don't have any issues between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. looking at businesses that are operating earlier that may have multiple problems, and if there's no capture point for those businesses where there have been multiple problems, it feels inequitable for the businesses that are just their only crime is operating 2 to 5 in the morning.
That's exactly right. And that's what, I totally agree with all the points that Chair Katz raised about we don't want to sweep up all those 12 to 2 businesses who didn't do anything wrong. We also don't want to sweep up the 2 to 5. I mean, all those same points could be made from 2 to 5. And that's kind of my overall concern with the bill. So I guess which is why I was trying to lean into, is there like a big enough incentive we could give that would allow us to kind of avoid this issue? I mean, if the consensus is such that there is not, I mean, I think it's worth thinking about. But if we are coming to the conclusion with the council that there is not, then my inclination would still be to find ways to narrow the scope as much as possible that are not geography and that are not serious incidents, that are clear black and white, breakdowns that we can use.
Go ahead.
I'm all for moving forward, and I mean, doing nothing is not an option, and
No,
I feel
I
like
agree.
we have some options here.
Yeah.
My point in raising those concerns about wording is we could try to clean it up and to level set everyone that, like, we may see after this is in play for a while that we have to tweak it again, and that's okay.
Right.
That was my suggestion. I think what I would suggest is you could do the 12 to 2 language, but narrow, be specific types of incidents that must, occur in the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
And, and those could be serious, stabbings, aggravated assaults, homicides, rapes. We could set a limit of serious crimes that maybe doesn't cover every serious crime that we might want to include ultimately, but you could broaden it over time based on observation.
And I'm assuming since your proposed amendment has the 12-month, the 12-month look back, that would be something that, there would be, and again, you'd have an ongoing look back so that any entity operating between 12 and 2 who doesn't operate after 2 but who ends up having 2 of the qualifying incidents would then be triggered to mandate to participate in this. Correct?
I'm going to suggest that for the first, once we finally get this done, and once it's finally up and running, which is going to take a little bit of time to do, the up and running part, I think we should look at it in 6 months to see where we are.
So I think the only challenge with timelines is I would argue that the time frame really between May and October is very different from October through April. So depending on, I do not know whether we will have regulations, and certainly businesses will need a lead time to comply.
And once it's up and running.
Right. So exactly. So my concern is if we may only have a couple months of data that are applicable this year.
I think once it's actually performing, once the legislation and the businesses are doing it, then rather than wait 1 year, we should come back. And if things are going, we can say we're not going to have that meeting that day. I mean, it's not like, but.
Or it could be a letter.
Yeah, or we can get a letter or whatever. But getting back to the 2, I still believe that the 2 to 5. So, however, this is going to full council. However we can word it, I think the way you've worded it in the packet today, that Councilmember Jawando is midnight to 5, and others were 2 to 5 or whatever 2 to 5. Then, and I think that should be in their discussions for full council.
Chair, if I may, just
Please.
What I have seen and experienced, I 100% agree that the 6 a.m. should be taken out. It doesn't need to include Panera Bread and Starbucks that are opening. But I do believe the 12 to 2 should be included.
Do you really?
And I'll tell you why. Prior to us starting this initiative over a year ago, some of the businesses that close at 2, we've talked about society and stuff like that, were having major problems. But then they started listening about the handheld metal detectors, and then the security staff, professionally trained, professionally dressed. Me going in and talking to them about this is how you do secondary pat downs. This is how you divert people from coming in, and huge night and day changes. And a lot of the times, when these businesses close at 2 a.m., this is where they go to the other establishments. So sometimes when we investigate crimes, this started 2 hours ago in this club, that the beef occurred and that they saw him leave and go to this establishment. So I would just say, if we're going to try to protect our patrons in the nightlife, let's protect them in the nightlife, and let's go between 12 and 5, so that way everybody that goes out for a good time knows that the police and businesses are working together to keep them safe.
Well, you said earlier that when you started talking to people and you used the term sold them on this legislation. I could see how you can sell somebody on legislation.
Yeah, you're talking him out of his own amendment.
That was pretty impressive, Captain. Why don't we put in both numbers, and I might bend on that one. That was pretty good. Yeah.
And we can get some information for the council about how many businesses would be impacted by the different time frames. We can probably look at liquor licensure, for example, and not all businesses that are able to stay open until 2 o'clock in the morning do so, and so obviously it will be a little tricky to figure out exact numbers, but we can give you a sense of who would be impacted and who might not.
Well, and part of what was in my mind is we had during the public hearing, we had at least one, maybe even more, but at least one restaurant owners say that they were marginal at this point, whether they could stay in business. They didn't want to hire a new security guard. They couldn't do that. So that's where I came in. But I do believe this is to try to stop problems, and I think we have to consider how we're stopping them.
And the question about the testimony that you were just referencing. And it was my understanding that there wouldn't necessarily be a mandate that you have to hire a security person, right?
At one point there was, yeah.
Right, but not as we currently sit right now. And that may be a factor depending on other things, and this would be something that you would be including in your regulations, and this would be further developed, but it's situation specific. So it's not requiring that of anybody. So it doesn't require that anticipated outlay of expenditure for that as a mandate.
So,
correct?
Speaking to the county attorney, as a government agent, we cannot direct people to conduct searches on it. If it's as a result of legislation, we can't. Government, you're essentially acting at the direction of government in that case.
Right.
And so, obviously, in our conversations, and obviously the council will see the regulations prior to their adoption. We're very interested in making this a collaborative process. The thought process is much more on for the things that would be required: the planning, the making sure your exits are clear and accessible, making sure that all of your exits are well lit.
Right.
I think we talked about like the tinting or obscuring the windows in certain circumstances being a challenge, if all those things, and then several things like that. Mm-hmm. Now there may be places in there, and I think actually there's a amendment that we may get to by next week that addresses some of the language around personnel and like we cannot require, nor would we require, but there may be some additional things that may be considerations or recommendations in the regulations that would not obviously be required because they're recommendations, but they just are meant to inform the business about what may assist your plan. Best practice.
But nothing is a mandate of a particular choice or a particular, personnel decision. Those will rest with the business based on the feedback that would be provided by presumably the department after submitting the plan. Because this is, as I understood it, something meant to be collaborative. It's, the government trying to assist businesses and work collectively within the community to solve ongoing issues and reduce them.
I'll talk them into it.
Yeah, you're our person. Thank you.
Yeah. And there's a few other things we'd like you to talk to the council members about. Okay, so are we okay on 4? Are we okay on 4?
We're just sending both.
Yeah, we're sending both. Okay.
Yeah, we're sending both.
Okay, so let's move on to number 5, please.
Okay, number 5, and we're on page 6 of the staff memorandum, relates to a potential amendment concerning who within the county government is charged with really implementing all of the nuts and bolts of this bill. There's a potential amendment proposed by the Chair Katz, Councilmembers Jawando and Stewart, and Council President Glass to amend the bill so that instead of having the bill necessarily implemented by the police department as the main agency implementing it, that it would be implemented by the office of the county executive or one or more offices or departments the county executive designates. It would also, this set of amendments would also include a definition of relevant departments in recognition that there are a number of players here who are serving the businesses and residents, and to make sure that those relevant departments, including police department, DEP, DPS, and Board of License Commissioners, are involved in, are consulted, going down to the sort of next set of amendments you'll see there, that they are consulted in the development of regulations and also in the development of a template safety plan for late night businesses, and involved in developing training for late night businesses.
So,
I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, this is also probably a segue. This might be the appropriate time to discuss Councilmember Mink has another potential amendment that's before you that would be an alternate approach of trying to utilize the regional service directors as the main sources of, implementing the bill, of approving and disapproving the plans. Thanks.
I have a couple thoughts or comments or things because there's a lot of different pieces, So with respect to the Regional Services Center folks, I think it might be good to allow them be part of the definition of relevant departments in that other amendment, but I would worry based on some things in my own district, not related to that, but in another capacity, where then there were, you don't want to upset the apple cart in the balance, and they provide a specific function to the business community that I don't know belongs in this other network of licensure and things. And so they should still be in their role as advocates and support to the business community and not put them in this other position, which is really, as the definition where it says after line 16, insert the following and lists relevant departments, breaks out. But I do think that it's important to have one entity has to be sort of the coordinating entity for this. And so that's not uncommon, particularly in other statutes or regs that I've drafted in the past, where it's the department in consultation with, and then you list out the other entities. So perhaps adding the Regional Services Center directors to that list of relevant departments or coordinators, if you will, to have input on how that works, and input on how, and reviewing the plans, and input on the regulations, which they all could have input on anyway without specifying it, because anybody has a right to provide comment on regulations before they're promulgated anyway. But that would be my thought on the various different amendments and the pieces working together.
Please.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. And the separating out of the relevant departments, I thought that made sense. Everybody who was included there. I also was some of the testimony that we heard that really struck me was from some of the business owners who were noting that this put the burden for public safety on them instead of on the county. Now, of course, acknowledging that, we have subsidies and different things worked in, but just basically that the kind of idea is, putting it on them to put together a plan to make it safer. Now, all of that said, I certainly understand the idea that we're addressing here, but I'm also sensitive to, it's important, we want our businesses to have a voice at the table also, and this is going to impact them in various ways, and there needs to be a balance there, and that's part of, the conversation and the dialogue that we're talking about. It really, it's ideally, as you've expressed, it's a collaborative kind of, working together, what's going to work for all parties situation. And so that's how I came to a couple of things here. One was adding a couple of business owners to the list of who gets consulted with. So that would be county executive, nominated by the county executive, approved by the council for a term of a year or whatever, But basically, the idea being to have a couple of business owners also be consulted as part of that conversation to provide that perspective and represent the interests of impacted business owners. And then the regional services director I came to because, their role really is to be working with and collaborating with all of these different county departments, which is what we're really asking this, whoever the headline department is, that's what we're asking them to do, is to consult with and work with all these departments. And that's what the regional services director does. And to your point, they also do work with the business community, work with, the residents. They have those conversations. That's part of their role also. So it seemed like a natural fit to have those pieces go together. And it also allows them to, well, of course, they still are, from the county. It seemed to me a more impartial, or somebody whose job it is to take everybody's opinion into account and kind of make everybody happy. And so I did talk to some of our regional services directors to get their thoughts on that. Jacob Newman was very supportive and enthusiastic about it. He did note also about the inclusion of the business owners on that there was also a real value in, he said he was just having a conversation with some of them about the value of peer accountability. And how useful that is in getting people to kind of do the right thing and getting them on board. And so he saw that as an additional value add of having business owners be part of the consulting group. And I asked him also about capacity. He felt comfortable that he would be able to do that. And we also talked about how, these issues, they can look different in different places. And the regional services directors do get to know what the picture looks like in each of those areas. They know the police officers who are in that area who are focused. Those are the conversations are very relevant to the particular businesses that are going to be discussed. So that was a piece of that that seemed like it made sense as well. I also had a conversation with Giroux, who said that this was an idea that he had advocated before previously, actually, and it didn't really happen. So he was very excited about that also.
Okay, just as a time check, I
Yes.
would like to finish this legislation today. It's now 4:30, so we're going to have to try to be as efficient as we can be, please. I'm fine saying Regional Services Center if they have the capacity. If they don't, I don't know, Earl, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I just wanted to be clear because there's a couple of times. So the question is, as a threshold question, the amendments that are on the sheet next to you would take out the police department.
Well, it moves them to a consulting.
Moves them to the consulting and makes the regional services directors.
No,
and
I
don't
not
think,
agree with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we needed to figure out amongst us before you could figure out how the other pieces might go together, right? So is that where you are?
Yeah, that's right. I believe the police department has to be a intricate part of this discussion. I have no problem with the regional services centers being the group that is the overseer of trying to get this accomplished if they have the capacity.
Well, so then my question becomes, if the Department of Police remains where it is, then that is the entity that is coordinating with these other entities. Would you want to add the Regional Services Center Director into the definition of relevant departments that's proposed on page 6, where it's an amendment after line 16, insert the following. Relevant departments means Montgomery County Police Department, Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Permitting Services, and then it would say Board of License Commissioners and Regional Services Center Director.
I'm fine to say it that way, or that they would be somebody needs to be able to call somebody. Somebody needs to coordinate this, and so I'm fine if they have the capacity, if the county executives side believes they have the capacity, I'm fine to have them be the coordinator. But I do believe that all the relevant departments need to stay relevant.
Right, but then my question is, are you then removing the Department of Police as the body that would promulgate the regulations in consultation with these? Because you're creating another entity, if you will, that's the consulting organization as opposed to... So you need to decide who you want to have be the entity that is in charge of promulgating the regulations as a threshold question before you can go down the path of the other pieces.
Earl, were you going to jump in? Go ahead and jump, please.
I was just only going to say, I think that the question of capacity is substantially impacted by the decision that the council makes on the timeframes. And so I think if you have a broader time frame, the regional center offices do not have staff. So reviewing the plans becomes much more onerous. If it's only 2 to 5 a.m. and if it's 2 to 5 a.m., even if you did include the multiple violation, that's a very narrow number of businesses. 2 to 5 a.m. is probably 10, 15 businesses across the county.
Maximum of 30, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a much smaller number. But if you open up the universe to anything from 10 to 12, or 12 to 2, sorry, it becomes a much greater project.
But getting back to the whole idea that the police department would be the group that would coordinate, I don't know that you all want to do that. I don't know that that helps to the situation where please.
Well, I would state this. I mean, it's not uncommon for when we're dealing with any problem, sort of in our community oriented policing model, that we would go in and coordinate with any problem area business that we would have or issues in any given area for that matter, and to develop a plan. And it is not uncommon in what we do now to bring in other departments to assist us with things that are outside of our realm of oversight or consultation because of their expertise or as subject matter experts. And so, and all things aren't regulated by us within the county code as an example, right? So, though we have the authority to, one of the issues that was, generally that we had as we've been dealing with alcohol issues in the late night hours and some of these other issues is because we have agencies such as permitting services or, or the liquor board that ABS that don't have people out in the late night hours to address this. It's guaranteed that we're going to be out there, right? And there at least there's a lead from our perspective that we can help to coordinate all of the other resources along with working with the regional services directors in order to, not to say, I think what everybody wants to say, who's the heavy hand here, right? But it's not about us being the heavy hand. It's about us coming collectively with the consultation that says that we're putting together a safety plan, right? That we're developing something that, again, there's might be the issues that are not necessarily anything that's police related from a safety perspective. It might be more so in line with some other agency. So that, just as a sort of a coordinating piece, only because we're sort of eyes on the ground, you might say, but still it's going to be led by similarly an executive who knows the issues very well. It's not going, we're going to bring in our community services officer that deals with businesses often about those very issues that I mentioned earlier.
Right. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you for that perspective. Yeah, and I think the eyes on the ground perspective and all of that. All of these pieces are an important part of what should be influencing the outcome here. My thinking is and that's why I think it's important to have these different bodies as part of the consulting group here. My understanding was that we have this list of different consulting groups because we're acknowledging that dealing with safety, the safety of a business and its impact on the surrounding community, and vice versa, does involve many different parties and many different concerns, and a lot of people have interests in it, including the business owners themselves, right? Who we want to stay and make happy and make sure that that they're able to thrive also. And so I feel like we want somebody in that overarching position who is going to take seriously the recommendations and the check-ins with these different bodies. But my feeling is that should be the person who's going to ultimately make the decision is somebody who's tasked with taking a holistic approach and trusted to be weighing all of these different perspectives, including the business owners. And so, my leaning would be to either, if we're not doing the 2 to 5, then to find other ways to limit the number of businesses such that they reach the capacity of somebody in the position of the regional services center where that is their role. Granted, they don't do licensure, neither do the police. If we wanted to, if it had to be somebody who did licensure, it could be DPS or HHS or something like that. But my feeling is that, again, that we want somebody who's tasked with representing all of these groups.
Yeah.
Okay, well, where I am at this point is I think after line 16, we should include the Regional Services Center as one of the relevant departments, but it should stay with the police department.
Right.
Please.
I'm uncomfortable with not having this be a primarily public safety function, and so I will not bless anything that takes that function away from understanding it needs to be collaborative, and understanding, again, in the public safety world, that's your business. That's always been the business of the public safety professionals, is being collaborative, cross-sector. But this is an emergency response. We're talking about emergency plans, and that's where it should rest.
So I guess it's 2-1. Is that? Yeah, okay. Okay.
Can I make one?
Sure, go ahead.
Suggestion? I think there'll be a friendly amendment to either, is to include the Department of Health and Human Services, because they.
Sure.
Yes,
license
Oh, that makes sense.
Yes, please.
We're good on that, right? Department of Public,
yeah, that's fine. And then, so are you not doing the original amendment that you had written with Councilmembers Jawando and Stewart and President Glass?
Well, I'm suggesting to add the health department. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for the coordinating entity, or for what is department for line 8, the original amendment brought by yourself, Councilmembers Jawando and Stewart, and Council President Glass had amended it to department, where I was suggesting regional services director, had made it department means the office of the county executive or one or more offices or departments designated by.
What we had suggested is that it is not only the police department, and the others were listed.
Gotcha.
Yeah, which I think is fair. Sure. And as far as I'm concerned, we should include the health department.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Katz, so on page 5 where you have those, or page 6 under item 5, when you have those list of amendments, so where it says amend line 8 as follows, department means, and then the proposal there is delete Montgomery County Police Department and substitute that.
That I disagree with. After line 16.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I just want to be clear on what the
Right.
two,
As far as I'm concerned, we're not deleting the
Right.
police department.
Okay, so not that, got it, thank you.
And then line 16, we're going to add the health department and regional services center. Okay?
Great, got it, thank you.
Okay, so now we're up to lines 31 and 43.
Correct, and this was amendments to bring those other relevant departments, the consultation group, if you will, into the process of developing the regs.
And
That's
I'm
fine.
fine with the way that's written.
Yep.
Okay? All right.
Next would be turning to page 7 of the staff report.
Sorry, this has my favorite one on it.
Yeah, okay.
Dr. Stoddard knows what I'm going to say.
Oh dear. Item number 6, it would relate to the requirements of the safety plan and the parts of the bill that set forth what must or, what must be included, and then the proposed amendments also deal with more discretionary pieces that, with justification, could be required, but would not necessarily be required. As you can see, the mandatory components would be the emergency evacuation, 24-hour contact information, exterior bathroom doors that are free and opening at all times, acknowledgement that the business received late-night business training from the county, and an acknowledgement that the business is in compliance with applicable law. Also listing any outstanding or resolved citations within the prior 3 years, and then the potential more discretionary components would be the requirement to have security personnel in training, exterior lighting, and high-definition digital security cameras.
So I'm good with everything, but I have one friendly amendment, which is about exterior bathroom doors that are free opening at all times, because obviously for a single person, we just don't want them free opening all the time. So we do, in fact, need our privacy. So could it be modified to say something to the effect of exterior bathroom doors on multi-stall bathroom facilities that are free opening at all times? Because I think that's what we want in those multi-stall settings, but not on our single use.
We had that bathroom bill, and I learned more about bathrooms than I ever knew in my whole life. But anyhow, so I'm fine with what you just said, and I'm fine with the listing. Are you?
I think that sounds.
We're okay. Okay.
Thank you. Item number 7 on page 8 of the staff memorandum would be a proposed amendment to permit an administrative appeal process, so that if a business's plan is denied, they could have an administrative appeal before the Board of Appeals prior to going to court.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. I just wanted to, since you all are sitting here, caution that when you are doing the regulations, there obviously needs to be some time frame or recognition of what the process, like how the process is going to play out from time of submission to approval or rejection and time to cure. I would strongly urge that you put a time to cure in there so that we can avoid as many appeals processes. And of course, again, back into that collaborative model of giving feedback and allowing for changes, that we should do something like that within the regulations. But other than that, I'm okay.
Are you? Yes? Are you? Yes. We're all okay on that.
Thank you. The next potential amendment, bottom of page 8, and issue number 8, relates to the police department access to surveillance footage, and in the event that digital security camera coverage is required, this set of amendments will clarify that, unlike in the original bill, that the business would not be required to give the police department access to the camera footage, except as otherwise required by law. In other words, if they have a warrant, then of course, yes, they'll be providing the footage, but that this particular bill doesn't in and of itself require them to share footage with the police department.
I'm still comfortable with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Item number 9. We're just jumping to page 10, making a lot of progress, Mr. Chair.
If you didn't need a late night business before this, you need one now.
This item number 9 really has 2 components, or 2 potential components for your consideration. One would be to allow businesses that operate after midnight and before 5 a.m., but are not otherwise subject to the requirement for the plans, could voluntarily submit a plan, work proactively with the county government and the various relevant agencies, and implement their plan. And then the carrot there, if you will, would be that they would then qualify for a new grant program, which you can see is sort of the second half of amendments there on page 10. I'll note a distinction between Council President Glass and Councilmember Jawando were not in favor of the voluntary plan component, but were supportive of the grant program. And then the other council members listed were supportive of both components.
Yeah, I think that as we begin this discussion, as we, that the way that this is written is attempting to get businesses to join in and do the right thing. And I think that if we open the grant program to the as far as we can open, and I think that might help. So that's where I am.
So I would just note that the first portion of Section 9, I see you nodding, is contingent upon the decision by the full council as to whether or not the 12 to 2
Right.
is required, not required, and so on and so forth. So that will, I agree with the language that's in there. I think we just can't decide fully because we have to wait till we deal with that later with the full council.
Go ahead, what'd you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say we might want to hold on this as being part of the same conversation.
Yeah, yeah. But I think we need to have this language in there. If you could, are you following what we're attempting to?
Yeah. Nobody has issues with the grant program
Right,
section of
yeah.
it. We're only questioning, and it's contingent upon what we decide
The
to
timing.
do as to the voluntary versus non-voluntary.
Okay,
I'm following. Yeah,
Okay.
makes perfect sense.
go ahead.
The only suggestion I may make is, in order to split the difference between the council members here, is you could prioritize the 2 to 5 that are, you prioritize the required businesses and therefore let the others be competitive based on the amount of funding that is provided.
And I'm going to assume that would be something that would be spelled out in the notice of funding availability for the grant, as opposed to needing to be in the statute.
Correct, but
Okay.
I think that's one way we would work with this.
To me, it's workable.
Okay, and just to clarify, the potential amendment does include that the department must prioritize awarding grants to late-night businesses over awarding grants to
Yeah,
businesses that
that's
submit
B,
the
you're
voluntary
saying.
ones. So that,
Age 11.
right, okay. The next item for the committee's consideration is whether to expedite the bill.
Yeah.
There was some support.
I
for that.
believe that we need to do that, and it's still, as was discussed earlier, it's still going to take a while to get things going, but if we don't start right away, then we don't get started, so.
Right.
You good? Everybody's good on expediting, and we expedited this today. We did good.
Look at us rolling right along.
Yeah.
The next potential set of amendments relates to reporting requirements, and these amendments, supported by the Chair, Councilmembers Stewart and Jawando, and Council President Glass, would add an annual reporting component. The department would annually report to the County Council regarding the plans reviewed under this section, any identifying, late-night businesses that have not submitted the required plans, recommendations for improvements on late-night business safety, information about the grants provided, and also crime data to provide a comparison, a before and after comparison, essentially, for the businesses who've adopted plans. Did, safety, were there safety improvements as a result?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great for good housekeeping. I would just caution and note that, of course, in the first year, it's a baseline report. So you're not going to have comparative analysis reports that are really effective until we've been at this for a little while.
Fair. Okay, we're good?
Okay, and the item number 12, this is simply clarifying amendments to indicate that the bill was originally worded that a person must not own or operate a late-night business without first submitting the plan, and just for the sake of clarity, staff recommends saying that a person must not operate a late-night business during the relevant hours. Obviously, that's going to be dependent on, what the council decides are the relevant hours. But so those are, cleanup amendments for consideration.
My only question or concern about this is, since we're doing it as emergency legislation, but knowing full well that it's going to take a hot minute for the regulations to be done, are you then creating a thing where, in effect, the statute has gone into effect saying you can't operate your business between these hours, but we don't have everything all fleshed out yet? So to me, there has to be a time frame in there, like after X amount of time post-pass, but I know it's hard
That's
to
a really
do.
good point. I mean,
Or post-promulgation of the regulations.
Or could you just put Earl's phone number in there?
Yeah.
I'll just put that in the
Yeah,
statute.
go ahead, Earl.
I would suggest you put something like within 90 days of being informed of the requirement to have a plan, or some
Or
time
within
frame.
90 days of the requirements? I mean,
Within-
of the,
I would rather
The
do it.
regulations being
regulations.
finalized.
Okay, again, if
to
you're.
me would be fair.
And I'd like to, I mean, with the committee's consent, like, I would prefer doing that as a, you know, an uncodified section 3 or whatever, or
Yes.
section 4.
Yeah.
You know, because it does have, it applies during the beginning, but it's not going to apply 5 years from now, so. we
Correct.
Phase it in.
Correct.
Are you okay with
Thank
that?
you.
I think that's fair. I mean, we're not trying to be unfair, we're trying to be fair, so. Okay, and then we're at 13?
Okay, certainly last, and perhaps least, this was just staff bringing to your attention whether you wanted to change the method of regulations, which, you know, as you know, the difference between the method 1 and method 2 is just that method 1 cannot go into effect until the council affirmatively approves them.
I'd like to keep it as it is.
I'd like to keep it as it is.
Okay, great.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes at least the items identified in the packet.
And well, no, thank you, and thank the committee for working through this. And as we're going to have similar discussions at full council, obviously, and but this is a work in progress that we're going to be, when it's finally finished, we're going to have a safer situation and be proud of it. So with that, this committee is adjourned.